All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. Good evening and happy Pride Month. Welcome to our Good Digital Parenting event, LGBTQ plus youth and the internet. My name is Jonathon Bridgeman, and I use he, him pronouns. I'm the administrator and events specialist at the Family Online Safety Institute, or FOSI for short. If you're new to our work, FOSI is an international 501c3 nonprofit organization whose mission is to make the online world safer for kids and their families. We work in the three pillars of policy, practices, and parenting. That is enlightened public policy, robust industry best practices, and good digital parenting. I am usually behind the scenes for our events and our webinars, taking care of logistics. But as a member of the LGBTQ plus community, planning our Pride Month webinar is one of the highlights of my year. The audience for today's event includes parents, teens, teachers, nonprofit representatives, tech industry professionals, policymakers, parenting experts, and possibly my parents. I think they might be in the audience. To everyone who's tuned in today, wherever you are in your journey as an ally or member of the LGBTQ plus community, you are welcome here. If you joined us for last year's Pride Month webinar, you'll remember that we heard from several organizations that provide resources for LGBTQ plus teens, youth, and their families. Organizations like LGBT Tech, the Sam and Devora Foundation for Trans Youth, Centerlink, the community of LGBTQ centers, and PFLAG National. In addition to hearing from practitioners in the online safety space, we at FOSI feel strongly about the importance of including voices of parents and young people in our conversations. We know from recent research conducted by organizations like the Human Rights Campaign and the Trevor Project, just how vital connecting with community online is to LGBTQ plus youth to find a sense of belonging and in some instances, a better understanding of their own identity. I'm thrilled that for this year's event, we will be hearing directly from two teens and their parents on how they're navigating an ever-evolving online world and learn a bit more about the rewarding and challenging aspects of connecting with their communities online. We'll have some time towards the end of the webinar for Q&A, so please feel free to use the Q&A feature to submit any questions you might have for our panelists. But first, to get the discussion started, I'd like to invite Ellen Kahn from the Human Rights Campaign onto screen, and I will turn things over to Ellen to present some key findings from HRC's 2023 LGBTQ plus Youth Report.
Thank you so much, Jonathon, and the whole FOSI team for including us in this really important conversation during Pride Month. It's an important conversation every day, as we will be discussing in more detail. I'm really glad you mentioned that young people are, that there are specific sort of considerations for LGBTQ young people. And whether you're a parent or a youth serving professional or a policymaker, we really appreciate you taking time to dig in a little bit more to this topic. And I'll kick you off with sharing some highlights from our national survey of LGBTQ teens. This is a survey that we do in partnership with the University of Connecticut roughly every 5 years. And in the last iteration of the survey, we had a set of questions specifically to help us better understand the online experiences of these young people who, for the purposes of the survey, are 13 to 17. So I am Ellen Kahn. I use she, her pronouns. I work at the Human Rights Campaign, and I've been there for about 17 years, maybe 18 now, and have had the pleasure of overseeing a lot of our work to support LGBTQ youth in their families, at home, and in other systems of care. Next slide, please. Great. So before I dive into the findings from our most recent survey, just some grounding. This probably won't be anything you're not familiar with. Roughly half of all teenagers use the internet regularly. I mean, many of them have to be online to complete school projects, but they're also online to connect and to engage in entertainment and socializing as well. 73% of LGBTQ plus youth from prior studies, not from our recent study, said that when they're online, they actually feel like they can be more honest about who they are, which as we'll talk about, can be both a positive thing, but also potentially a more risky thing. 62% of all teenagers in the US say that people should feel welcome and safe online, rather than being in spaces that focus on sort of free speech, to the point where that could include things that feel very hurtful or are just straight out harassment of LGBTQ teens. And that's why we hear from our community that they're more inclined to moderated, safer spaces where hate speech or unkind speech, to say the least, would not be tolerated online. Next slide, please. Our research, as I mentioned, we do this in partnership with the University of Connecticut, and in our most recent survey, which is in the field in 2022, and then analyzed over the past year, we heard from about 13,000, just under 13,000 LGBTQ youth from every state across the 13 to 17 year age span. Next, please. Thank you much. So these are the topics we asked about in our survey, and I'll touch on some of the findings from each one. So how folks go online, what they're looking for, do they have any bad experiences such as cyberbullying, how do they find and build community, and then where and if or where and how they learn about online safety and education, which is very much the focus and mission of FOSI. Next slide, please. Great. So what we heard from our respondents is that nearly all do go on the internet to find information that helps them better understand their own LGBTQ plus identity. So that's across LGBTQ plus and including trans and non-binary young people. That's what I consider a positive and important reason to be accessing the internet for our community in particular. 8 in 10 of LGBTQ plus youth, pretty much the same number of trans and gender expansive youth, have used the internet to locate LGBTQ plus inclusive sexual and reproductive health information. That is probably due to several factors, one of which is many young people are not getting adequate sexual health education at all, regardless of whether they're LGBTQ. Just many of our schools are not putting the resources into that particular type of curriculum and content. And when they do, it's often really kind of missing any references to or discussion of LGBTQ young people and some of the topics that might be uniquely of interest to them. And then 9 in 10 LGBTQ plus youth use the internet for locating information about their identity versus doing it in some other ways, like talking to people or maybe going to community centers because they're afraid to be outed. So doing this online, you can maintain some anonymity, not be outed to your parents or to educators or in any way in your community. So again, it can be a buffer for some folks who are not quite ready to be out or are afraid to be out for very good reasons in many cases. Next slide, please. So more than 2/3 of our young people from the LGBTQ plus community, and even more who are trans or gender expansive, participate in online communities for people their age. And I'll be really looking forward to hearing from the 2 young people this evening about whether that's been true for them and what that experience has been like. But there are really well-facilitated, very intentional communities for LGBTQ plus youth. And it's especially important for young people who may live in more rural areas, or they're too young to take public transportation or drive themselves, or even get a ride to an in-person type of gathering that might take place at an LGBTQ center. So again, that online connection might be the only connection that some young people have. Next slide, please. Great. So on the sort of downside of the online experience for a lot of people, nearly all, close to all of the LGBTQ youth who responded to our survey have seen content on social media that was offensive or hurtful toward LGBTQ plus people. Again, a lot of these sites are not moderated. Comments and resharing and reposting and retweeting can just perpetuate some of those very unpleasant and often intentionally hurtful comments and posts. And again, this is the quote down here, just where some young people have been in spaces that were, marketed as safe and moderated, but then the moderators weren't really doing their job to remove either the people or the comments that were hurtful. Next slide, please. 80% of youth who answered our survey said that they would be uncomfortable reporting cyberbullying. That actually tracks with the answers they gave us to whether they would report in-person bullying that would happen, say, in the school hallway or in the school bathroom. So in general, young people are reticent to report that they're being bullied or harassed, whether it's in person or online. 80% of youth say that they don't think that reporting it would actually do anything, that an educator or another adult in their school would actually take action and try to address that. Many young people still don't know how to report cyberbullying or hate speech or other hurtful things they're seeing online. So that's a good thing for adults to think about, and making sure young people know what to do if they would like to report it, and encouraging them to do that. And then about 70% said they were not confident that the platform, the folks that are, responsible for these platforms, be it Instagram, TikTok, would actually help to resolve the bullying. And from our perspective at the Human Rights Campaign, there's a good amount of truth in that, unfortunately, where sometimes the platforms themselves are not taking this as seriously as we would like them to. Next slide, please. So online safety and education, this is very much in line with what this whole the point of this webinar is, and really FOSI's mission, right? So 1 in 7 youth who answered our survey say they don't feel safe participating in online activities. That's, I don't know exactly how that tracks with non-LGBTQ youth, but I think that most folks feel safe, right? So only 1 in 7 don't feel safe. And the majority say that at least one adult has talked to them about online safety. And that could have been a parent or an educator, maybe school counselor, or another caring adult that helped them think through how to maintain as much safety as possible. Next slide, please. This shows who are those adults that LGBTQ youth are most likely to be learning from. What we don't know, though, is whether these adults, be it parent, educator, or another adult, knew the LGBTQ identity of these youth, and whether the conversation might have been a little different had they known. So again, those are some of the things we'll talk about tonight. And then the next slide, please. Jonathon will send around the link to the full report. This was just really a slice of data specific to the topic tonight, but we have lots of other data about LGBTQ youth at home and at school, mental health, their views of the future, their hopes for the future. So if you're interested in this topic, feel free to dig into this report, and you'll have the link to that shortly. So you can stop sharing now, and appreciate you letting us kind of set the landscape a little bit. One of the things I just want to say before we welcome Hans and his son Nico, and Rachel and her daughter Libby, some of you probably know this very well, but in the last couple years, and really in the last year especially, there has been kind of a renewed culture war aimed at LGBTQ people. We've made a lot of progress. If you talk to young people generally, they're 90% say they're proud to be part of the LGBT community. They feel like generally things are getting better. The younger people generally have more open, are more open to LGBTQ people. So we see that shift generationally, but there's sort of an incredible backlash. Hundreds of anti-LGBTQ bills proposed in state houses across the country. Hate speech that's just all over the internet, and conservative radio and TV, and folks really just being very emboldened to engage in hate speech and in hate crimes against LGBTQ people. So that stuff is happening in real life, in schools, on the street, and community, and it's also happening online. So as much as you can have the sort of high points of, for example, a really wonderful, facilitated, safe online group for young people coming out, you could also see some of the worst of humanity spewing a lot of anti-LGBTQ rhetoric online. So it's kind of the best and worst of times. And I just want to say that to kind of contextualize the conversation we're having. So I'd like to welcome to join us Hans and his son Nico, who are in two different spaces right now, and Rachel and her daughter Libby, who are together in their home. So we'll get all of them on camera. And I want to make sure I can see everybody here. Oh, good. Okay. So we're going to start just getting a little sense of who our guests are. So I'm going to start by asking Hans and Nico just to tell us a little bit about yourself, where you live, Nico, for you, how old you are, and then just, something that's been on your minds, especially with, in light of what I just said about this being sort of a particularly tough time for the LGBTQ plus community. So I don't know, Hans, if you want to start, that'd be great.
Sure. I'm hoping Nico's tech issues get resolved quickly.
Okay.
Yeah, my name is Hans. I'm in Virginia, and our family, we got 3 boys, and Nico's our youngest. There's a 6-year age gap between our oldest son and our youngest son, Nico. And what really strikes me is how the world of technology has so completely changed. When my oldest went into middle school, most kids didn't have cell phones. When we went to high school, most kids didn't even have laptops. And now that world is just so completely different. And if you layer on top of that the public discourse challenges that Ellen was stating, which is a daily concern of mine, that our world has become so openly hateful, there's just sort of it's a very difficult place for parents to navigate, and figuring out that balance is just a continuous conversation, I would say. So that's kind of what's on my mind.
Thank you, Hans. Nico, we don't have you on camera, but let's see if we can hear from you.
Sorry about that. I'm not sure what's going on. It's just not working. I'll keep working on it. But hello, I'm Nico. I'm 18 years old. I live in Virginia, and I definitely have had the experience of sort of starting out with the internet being the place where I'm exploring my identity and where I belong. And for me, it's been really fruitful to move that into my in-person life, because as we sort of talked about, those quote unquote safe spaces on the internet aren't always safe. And I've had much better experiences in person, I would say. So that's been an interesting experience.
So much for that. Okay, so Rachel and Libby, let's hear from you. Rachel, you're welcome to start if you'd like. Make sure you come off mute. There you go.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Rachel. I use she, her pronouns, and this is my daughter, Libby. And are we supposed to answer a question? I wasn't prepared for that.
Just
And
anything that's sort of on your mind, just kind of based on what I was saying about the particular climate we're in right now.
So Libby, so unlike Hans and Nico, Libby is my oldest of 3. And so I have been trying to figure out how to navigate all of these things, diving in head first, I guess. And it is a very challenging climate that we're in, especially because we live in Texas, where, there are some especially hostile environments regarding LGBTQ youth in our political landscape here. And I started having conversations with my kids about internet safety at a very young age. And I've had to rethink in many ways my personal engagement with social media and the internet in general, just as a safety precaution for my kids. So I'm looking forward to getting a little deeper into it. I'll let Libby introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Libby, and
Pronouns, age.
I she, her pronouns. I'm 14, and
What are you thinking about?
I'm thinking about my new haircut that I got.
Yeah, it's a really nice haircut. Well, let me ask you a question, Libby, that can just transition us into the next part of our conversation. Why do you think it's important to create safe spaces online for LGBTQ plus teens in particular?
Because I feel like we're like the main targets right now. And I think that's why it's the most important that we need safety, because we're also like, I don't know how to explain
You're
it.
building
Like,
community.
what?
Building community. You talk about all the time about like having spaces to build community.
Yeah. Sorry, it's been a really long day.
Okay, no worries. We'll get into all of it. Nico, do you want to add anything to that question about why, creating safe spaces for LGBTQ plus young people in particular is important?
I think it's especially important because for teens, like what your teenage years are you trying to figure out who you are. And I think that even when you, like, I grew up in a supportive area, I have a supportive family, I knew that they would be supportive, and I still didn't feel comfortable going out and exploring sort of who I was in person. That's a really daunting thing to do. It feels like you're making a big commitment. And I think that some of the strengths of the internet is it can feel a little bit more temporary. So you're allowed to say, you know what, I'm going to try out this name, I'm going to try out these pronouns. Or it could be, I'm just going to talk to other people and see if they have similar experiences to me. And that's something that's much easier to broach online with a bit of anonymity and things like that. So I think it's really important to create spaces for people to try that, because I don't think I would have come out as soon as I did if I didn't have that experience to sort of, I don't know, bolster my own confidence in coming out, because it's such a big deal to come out, and I don't think it should be, but because it is, you kind of want to feel secure in that choice. And I think that having the ability to explore that in safe spaces on the internet made me feel much more comfortable exploring that in my own in person.
Yeah. I appreciate that. That's just exactly what the survey was showing when I was talking about that a few minutes ago. Libby, maybe I can ask you for examples of, say, maybe an example of a positive experience you had on social media, and is also maybe a negative experience you had on social media, because I know you've been an activist from early on, more by circumstance because of what's been going on in Texas, but being online and posting some of your things, can you give an example of one positive and one not so positive experience?
Being on social media and stuff for me has been a really like good way to like find like community, but also like learn from other trans people and like hear about their experiences and kind of just like relate to people like me. And a negative thing,
Something comes to mind. Yeah, sure.
when hate comments appear on like kind of just like people that I follow's videos, or like my posts. Like I've only had like one hate comment before on like a post, and then I just made my account private.
Sure.
But that was really hard, and it kind of took like it was a lot for me to handle, because I had kind of just sort of recently started using social media. It was kind of a while ago, and that took a toll on my mental health, like a lot. And so yeah, and
Because you didn't realize the
Yeah.
haters that were out there before you got social media.
yeah.
Yeah, well, that's a good pivot to a question I'll start with you, Rachel, and then go to Hans from the parent perspective. So what are some ways you might start a conversation, specifically with the kid who's part of the LGBTQ plus community, about, navigating online in a way that keeps them as safe as possible?
I mean, I think a lot of the things that we talk about all the things we talk about are things that I think are applicable to all kids, not just LGBTQ kids, but it's forefront of my mind and probably jump-started the conversation because of our situation, having a trans daughter in Texas, where it became really obvious that it was necessary to have conversations around privacy in a way that wasn't, it may not be as forefront of mind for a lot of people, like don't post anything that has where you go to school. Don't share your location. If you're sharing pictures with your friends, make sure you have their consent. Things that, if somebody messages you and you don't know them, you should not accept it. And really, I mean, to be perfectly honest, I probably scared Libby a little more than I should have, but I mean, maybe not, but just the reality of the fact is there are bad actors out there, and as scary as it is, safety is our top priority. And sharing with Libby, there are some really severe risks if you do not keep these things front of mind, and we can't have an open conversation. So, we have to have a relationship where if something pops up on her social media, she knows that she can come to me and I'm not going to get mad about something, and we can have a conversation about who it is. But also, I mean, I'm kind of all over the place here, but we also have a lot of conversations around, like, I'm on her Instagram to be able to show her, look, this person sent you a request and they have 0 followers. Like, clearly this is a spam account. Talking through some of those things that as adults, we've accumulated that information over time. That's not necessarily information that she has, and she's learning, but it's a lot of those safety barriers. Like, we don't post specifics about where we live. We don't post specifics about what restaurants we regular, like those kinds of things.
Gotcha. That's super helpful. Hans, you want to share?
Yeah, sure. So I guess one thing I would put out there is I think the kids are a bit smarter about a lot of these things than we are. Or at least they're understanding how technology is evolving, like what the platforms even are. Like, I mean, when I talk about Discord, I feel like I'm a hip guy, but I think Discord is probably already passé, right? So, one way I guess I tend to try to trust my kids on this stuff, and that doesn't mean trust them without having conversations. It just means to put their trust that their head's in the right place as a starting point. And so starting conversations around, tell me how you're keeping yourself safe. Talk to me about what you're doing. How are you ensuring that you're not overly exposing yourself online? How are you making sure that the people you're talking to have your best interest and are in fact people you should be talking to and trusting? And so kind of asking the kid to explain to me. I mean, again, this is as Rachel mentioned, this is really just parenting, really. It's parenting of any kid. It's a question of, and I think for teenagers in particular, our teens are all, the world the teenagers are living in, as I discussed, is changing so quickly, so fast. I mean, none of us can keep up. And so in some ways, sort of inverting the script a little bit and saying, hey, talk to me about what you're doing, and challenging my kid to make me feel confident that I can trust them on the internet, right? But also keeping the lines of communication open completely all the time around. And Rachel brought up a really good point. If there's something, what I really want is if my kid doesn't feel safe, I want them to feel comfortable coming to me for help, regardless of what the situation is. If it's 2 o'clock in the morning and they're somewhere they shouldn't be and they need a pickup, I want them to call me, right? If they've gotten themselves into a dark hole on the internet and they don't know what to do, I want them to talk to me, right? And so keeping that communication open is really critical. And certainly on the identification and social media front, a few years ago when Nico came out, we went through an entire process of thinking about my inner online identity as well, and going through and deep diving into my Facebook accounts and my Instagram posts and thinking, do I really need these pictures that are 6 years old and show a different identity for my child than he's presenting now, and doing some purging. And yeah, but again, to me, I guess where I start from as a parent is trusting the kid. But in these days, the stakes are so high that we have to trust and have the conversations. I don't like trust but verify as an expression. I don't think it's even right. But I think trust and engage in the conversation is important.
That's super helpful. Maybe Nico and Libby, you could speak a little bit to this. So you both have the benefit of supportive families. I think you both kind of emerged into your authentic selves in your adolescence, or younger. So you're kind of established and you have, you know how to find support for the most part. But I'm sure you know some folks or have come across folks who are part of the LGBTQ plus community, like your peers, younger people who maybe don't have the support at home or are just earlier in their journey. Can you speak to what the online world is like if you're, quote unquote, in the closet or not out or alone, just coming to grips with your LGBTQ identity? Maybe you've experienced some of that from the earlier parts of your journey or from knowing other LGBTQ young people. Because I think what I'm hearing a lot from Rachel and Hans is, you can have these frank conversations with your kids, which is great. But what if you didn't know that your kids were LGBTQ? What if you just assumed that they're all cisgender and heterosexual, and you're missing, right, a whole part of the conversation? So where, Libby and Nico, have you observed how other young people might be struggling more and some of the pitfalls if they really don't have that support to help them navigate online?
I can hop in. I think, at least for me, for the period of time when I would consider myself out online and not out in person, it definitely sort of created an environment where it felt like the time I spent online was the time when I was really sort of alive. But also, I think something we've learned through things like COVID is you can't live online. It actually kind of sucks. Like, you really talking to people in person and having those relationships in person are really valuable. And so it was really hard to be in this place of the only place where people really know who I am and understand me is, on, quite frankly, Discord was the place where I spent a lot of time when I was sort of first coming out online and things like that. But those spaces also, I think when you talk about sort of those conversational spaces, where sort of how do we're creating an LGBTQ community, right? If it's flagged that way, then you will be whatever harassed, rated. That happens often. And it became a thing that I got used to, and then was sort of like, once I stopped engaging with those communities as much because I had sort of phased into an in-person community, I was like, oh, that was really like not okay. And I think that experience of being out online specifically, it can feel really exciting in one way because you're just starting to sort of dip your toe into the experience of being seen, but you also end up normalizing harassment. And I think that is almost, and in some ways, the harassment didn't even bother me that much because it just felt like, yeah, this is what it is. Being out is some, Nazi will bust into this chat room and spew things for about 5 minutes before things get handled, right? That became a standard experience, which is really bad. And I think that to me, that harassment was never normalized in person at all. It wasn't something I really experienced in person either. And so I think that it's this tough balance of, this is really exciting, and checking in with yourself and being aware that there is harassment that is happening and that isn't okay. Like, knowing that's not okay.
Yeah, that's helpful. And you can imagine if you put yourself in, we put yourself in your shoes, or any young person who's going through that. If you don't have a safe person at home, a parent, caregiver, another family member, to say, holy heck, I can't believe what just happened online. Like, that's, putting you even at greater risk. So I think it just emphasizes the importance of trying to have those conversations, at least with a caring adult, even if maybe you can't be a parent in the moment, someone that you can say, look, this happened and I'm scared. What should I do? Libby, you want to add anything?
I don't, well, I personally came out before I had like access to like internet and like screens and like a phone and all that.
Yeah.
But
I think
What do you-
it's really different experiences at different.
Yeah. Where do you go online? Like, what are some of the sort of places you show up, and are there differences in how friendly or safe you feel on these different platforms or spaces?
I personally am not really on like any like Discords and stuff, but I do have friends that are, and most of my friends are very introverted, and I feel like for introverts, it's a lot easier to communicate through that and like meeting people like online, because like it kind of takes away the pressure of talking to people in person and like remaining anonymous and stuff, I think. I don't know how it works very well.
But where do you go online?
I go online mostly just to like to communicate to other people.
Or what you do online?
Yeah.
I just kind of I have a lot of group chats with my trans friends that I've like met throughout like the years, and so I just kind of like talk to them online and stuff
Mhm.
about like how I'm feeling.
They
And
do
like
Instagram and
and
Spotify.
yeah, and then sometimes I like to just make Spotify playlists with my friends about like being queer, just like yeah.
So a little bit more like a controlled set of people where you can really be safe and be yourself, which is great. So let me switch back a little bit to Rachel and Hans for the parent perspective. So from your perspectives, a lot of folks listening have kids who are not part of the LGBT community. We want them to be good actors, right? We want them to be good classmates, good friends, good peers online versus being, part of the problem that both Libby and Nico mentioned, which is sometimes people are not kind. So what are some ways that people can really be allies, to really, be supportive, especially in online spaces? What are some actions or behaviors you would like to see folks engage in so that your kids have a better experience online?
You want to go first, Hans? You want me to?
I think that's a Rachel. Yeah.
So I think that there's a lot of opportunities to be mindful of and also proactive about. I think in our case, certainly I really appreciate other parents checking in before they post anything about my family or my kids. And I think across the board, that's a pretty good practice. I always check with other parents before I post anything that might include their kids. I also just in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking that if it's not something that I wouldn't want in the hands of my arch nemesis, if I had one, I shouldn't post it, period, because even if it's something private, nothing is really ever private on the internet. So I shouldn't share it. Nobody should share personal private information about my family or their own family. But also, I think in general, when there are, great posts or debatable posts, so to speak, about the LGBTQ community, it's really nice to see allies out there sharing, commenting, because it can feel really overwhelming and it can feel like the haters out there are outnumbering us, when I don't think that's actually the truth. It just can feel that way because they get a lot louder. And
Sorry.
I think that it's one of the greatest allyships for me personally to have friends that are willing to step up to share those articles. It's not just me and other parents of trans kids in our little community that's out there sharing information, because half the time our friends are like, I wouldn't even know that this was happening if it wasn't for you sharing it. But if other people start to share it, other people start to comment, and then it comes up in conversation, then you're better informed. You know that these things are happening and you can disrupt homophobia, transphobia in a way that's really impactful in impacting cultural discourse around this stuff.
Love that. Hans, what do you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to add on to that because that's already pretty solid right there, allyship. What I might just say too is that as a parent of a transgender kid, who you can't see, but anyway, um, he's not necessarily obviously transgender, right? And so same goes for anybody on the internet anywhere, right? And so to me, it kind of comes back to information. We shouldn't make assumptions about people's identities. We shouldn't be outing people one way or the other and making assumptions around that. And just because you might happen to know that my kid is trans doesn't mean that you should be commenting about that in a way. And I run a parent support group here in Virginia, and a big issue is sorry, my brain is having some trouble here. A big issue is how do you talk about being trans in growing circles of people, your identity in growing circles of people, right? Maybe you've got a safe circle that knows, and you've got a circle beyond that that maybe doesn't know yet. Maybe you've told your immediate family, but not the extended family. Maybe you've told your closest friends, but not everyone. And so, and the online, that just gets turned to 11, right? And the risk reward of that gets turned really high. And so being just as an ally, being very mindful that for many individuals, being part of the LGBTQ community is a journey and a process. It's not just necessarily you know, especially for teens, they're on a journey, right? That maybe not everyone is involved in yet. And so just being really mindful of that as an ally and stepping in whenever you can preemptively so that the immediate families that are dealing with it don't always have to be the one fighting the battles, right? It gets a little bit exhausting because we are right now at the forefront of the culture war somehow. But really, we're just parents supporting our kids. I mean, that's all it is. Like, and we don't want to be social justice warriors. And I can't speak for Rachel and Libby, but I can speak for myself. I think I can speak for myself. Like, we're just trying to like raise our kids and support them and love them. And went online in terms of going back to online safety, that's just a matter of the less we can create problems for ourselves and the less others can inadvertently create those problems is really helpful. And yeah.
Yeah, I think that's all that really wise words from both of you. And I will have a final question for Libby and Nico, but before I do that, I just I want to mention something that kind of came up, but just to put a finer point on it, there's a good reason to create spaces online that are explicitly for LGBTQ people, especially like there's a great resource called QChat, which is they offer facilitated private groups for LGBTQ young people. So no matter where you live, you can get into one of these groups and have a really safe place to explore your identity or connect with other people and learn about resources. And those spaces are super important for our community. We know from hearing from LGBTQ youth that it's whether it's the Gender Sexuality Alliance at school or an online, sport, having that can really improve your mental health and well-being overall, right? It's a known fact. But we're not saying at all that LGBTQ young people should only be in those spaces, right? They want to be in gaming rooms. They want to be on Facebook groups because they're interested in dogs or, crafts or whatever it is, like, right? And the world we want is that our kids are safe and welcome in any space. And to your point, we don't know who's LGBTQ. You can be in a group for people who want to, work on a park cleanup project in their neighborhood. And of course, you're going to have LGBTQ people in that group. So it's sort of like coming into these spaces with, a sense of using inclusive language, using kind language, not making any comments that would be hurtful to anyone. So I think that's kind of what we would ideally want for folks. And on that topic, I think pivot, and this, I thought of you a lot, Libby, when this question came up. I'd love for both you and Nico, before we open for questions and start to wrap up, can you share something that is sparking queer joy for you or trans joy for you this summer?
Do you want to go first? Or
I can. So I'm on a trip with my friends right now out to a cabin that we have out in the woods. So it's had to track down some Wi-Fi, which clearly isn't working quite well enough to get me a video, but here we are. And I think that what's sparking queer joy for me is getting to spend time with the people that I love, especially gearing up. I'll be going to college this fall. And so I think for me, it's being around people who love and support me, especially this Pride Month, and just getting to be myself with the people that I love is my rock.
Awesome. Love it. Libby?
For me is kind of just like the fact that it's Pride Month, but then also I was in a fashion magazine recently, and that's kind of been one of my dreams since I was like 3. And I'm in fashion magazine's issue 11 called Expression for Pride Month. And that has just been like, it just feels unreal, and I'm so happy about it. And getting to do all of like the festivals and all the Pride stuff, and like being in the parade, and getting to meet a lot of other trans and just queer kids like my age, because that has kind of been one of my goals this year, because a lot of my friends that live in Texas have moved away due to the legislation and stuff. And so it's been really cool and fun meeting LGBTQ kids like me.
Awesome.
Oh,
Well,
and
that's fantastic.
that was really cool. Meeting both.
Okay.
That was really cool.
That's a lot of joy. I'm happy for
Yeah.
both of you, and that's how it should be, for sure. So we're gonna see if we have some questions from any of the audience, and I do see one that I actually think I'm gonna read it, because I think it might be best answered by Nico and or Libby, and then we, the rest of us can jump in with additional thoughts on that. But the question is, how are we seeing LGBTQ plus youth use social media to build coalitions in this current political climate? And if we're not seeing it specifically youth, just generally how we might be seeing people using social media to kind of build more coalition and power together. Anybody can answer, that's fine.
Maybe you could talk about your trans prom account.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Would you talk about organizing and creating a following in there?
Wait, what?
So
Okay, yeah, go ahead. Rachel, you go ahead.
so last year, Libby was part of a youth committee that organized the first trans prom on the US Capitol. And so we created social media accounts so that we have built a following of different brands. I mean, there are really great corporate sponsors in there. There's also just youth and adults and community members that are all interested in building and celebrating joy, because the narrative is so heavily directed to like a victimization and anxiety, depression kind of narrative. That's shifting that narrative and building momentum around that, I think, is getting a lot more traction since I mean, not just since then, but especially since they started intentionally shifting that with trans prom. So, I'm not sure that they have decided what they're going to do next steps to activate the coalition of people that they brought together, but that's one example I can think of. And, Libby's probably a little bit on the younger side for that kind of organizing. It's probably more something that Nico could speak to, maybe, but
Nico, feel free to add, and I can share a couple thoughts as well if
Yeah, I have not done as much organizing as I would like, if I'm being honest. I've been very, very busy with, applying to colleges and things like that.
Sure.
But for me, I think that sort of coalition aspect you talked about with queer youth, I think it comes down to that what we were talking about with knowledge and sharing knowledge. and talking about how people are learning about themselves through seeing other people like them, learning how to be proud. And I think that is a huge value of the internet. And I think that it is extremely applicable to queer youth, which is that you're able to learn who you are by hearing from other people like you. And so for me, that I think has been the most impactful for me personally. And I like to think that other people, that even when you talk about like media appearances, things like that, like that is seeing somebody like you standing up, saying, here's who I am, here's what I think, here's what I'm fighting for, my own right to exist, and to be proud, and things like that, I think is really impactful for everyone, but especially for youth who are going through such a formative time. So I think for me, that would be what's been most impactful.
Yeah, that's great. And I'll mention Queer Youth Alliance is a group that started, I think, in Massachusetts, and it through social media and different kind of chats that folks created. There's now like a national network of queer youth who are generally speaking high school age, and they're organizing nationally. They organized a big presence in DC. So I do see folks finding ways to channel their energy and their passion online for sure. So really love seeing young people kind of organize without having to follow the lead of adults, but to actually be supported by adults, I think is awesome. There's a really important question that came in, which is, I don't know, this might be a little bit more of a Nico Hans just because of the age of Nico. I haven't been on dating apps in a long time, so I can't help you. But the question is there specific advice for queer or trans young people on using dating apps to find romantic connections? Does it feel different than it might for a non-LGBTQ young person? Are there any kind of tips or considerations?
This isn't something I personally know anything about. I am in a relationship, but we met in person through school. And I've heard other people talk about this before, and I think that it comes down to this balancing act that we've been talking about of wanting to share enough about yourself that you're not getting yourself into dangerous situations in person, but also not sharing so much that you're ending up in a dangerous situation online, right? And this, do you include information about yourself? Like, are you like saying you're trans, right? Because you don't want someone to sort of be talking to you and not be okay with that, because then that ends up just sort of sucking for both of you, but then striking that balancing act. So I don't know. I think hypothetically, if I was to be on a dating app, I would probably not disclose that on a profile, just because that does lend yourself to a lot of things like harassment and stuff like that, but would be something I would share early on. Sort of like, if hypothetically I was on a dating app and I matched with someone, then sort of the first message being, hey, just want to let you know, but then you're not sharing that quite as publicly. So then you're not sort of opening yourself up to harassment by even having a profile in the first place, but not something I know about. So it isn't the best answer.
Yeah.
If I could jump in, and I haven't been on a dating app ever, I'm sorry. Luckily, perhaps. But I will say, so Nico is heading off to college in the fall, and he's looking for a roommate. And finding a roommate is a bit like a dating app, frankly. And it's been a very difficult process to navigate, because, and I don't know about dating apps. I'm assuming dating apps are similar, but they ask the prospective students, oh, are you messy? Do you like to study late? Do you like to get up early in order to help the kids match with other kids? What they don't ask is, would you be comfortable having a queer roommate, right? Which is really the question, because you don't want to force kids to have to out themselves to be in a queer space. And so, but it's been this very delicate dance that Nico's been doing around trying to find a roommate and having conversations without having to proclaim on his application that, hey, I'm trans. And so I think the world has a little ways to go in the same way as we're trying to introduce using pronouns, even if it's sometimes feels unnecessary. It's in order to make it so that everyone can say their pronouns without having to ask, right? That's what it's like. And so similarly, I would argue there's some work to be done here on gender identity, and I'm guessing on dating apps as well. But again,
Absolutely. Well, maybe we'll do a whole session on that sometime. I appreciate the questions. I think that we have
Ellen,
answered.
I do think,
Yeah.
if I can just add
Please.
one quick line,
Please.
Obviously, Libby's not on a dating app. I've never been on a dating app like Hans, but as Libby's parent, I've been doing a lot of recon, trying to figure out, because there really is like a huge spectrum of what people think is the right thing to do. And so I think really the answer to that is it's personal. There are, Laverne Cox maybe last week was live talking about how she put in her dating app loud and proud that she is trans because she didn't want to waste 1 minute with somebody who did not want to date her because she's trans. But then I think it was in response to Raquel Willis having said that she doesn't tell somebody on the first date, but on the second date, once she gets to know them, they get to know her. So, I mean, all that to say, I don't personally have a right or wrong answer here. I just know that everybody has a little bit different perspective on what is right for them.
Right, and there are probably some nuanced differences for a kid who's lesbian, gay, bisexual, and cisgender versus a kid who's trans, no matter what their sexual orientation is, right? So it's, what do you know about your kid and their gender identity and their sexual orientation, and then having that nuanced conversation.
And I think Libby,
I think you're gonna.
What do you want to say?
Yeah.
So I was like listening to this podcast and Laverne Cox was on it, and she was talking about like like she said I'm literally 14, but she was talking about how like for safety and like to make sure, yeah, just like for safety and stuff, and like to make sure that she doesn't like get ghosted or anything, she like picks a place to like meet up that's kind of like near-ish and waits for them to say like who she's meeting is going to be there before like.
Right. Yeah, I mean,
Like,
that's
to make
good,
sure
right? There's, to your point, like there's some basic, just good practices, right? Don't give too much personal information. When you do meet in a public space, tell someone else where you're going. Don't disclose, too much until you get a sense of the person. I mean, I think a lot of that applies. And I think there also are some dating apps specifically for people who are queer. And then within that, like those dating apps are going to vary. So I appreciate what you said, Rachel, about kind of your own, it's like, it's a little bit different for everybody. Anyway, I think that we have about hit our hour mark. So I want to appreciate and thank once again our friends at FOSI, Alana and Jonathon, and Hans and Nico. Sorry we couldn't see you, Nico. And Rachel and Libby, thank you so much for taking time out of your day. And you can reach out to HRC through, come to the website, find some resources, or through FOSI if you'd like to dig into any of these topics a little bit more. We hope you all have a wonderful, colorful Pride Month.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Sorry about the camera.
No worries.